Hey, what's going on, everybody? Roger's Base here with my review of One Piece anime episode 737, The Birth of the Legend, The Adventures of the Revolutionary Warrior Sabo. And I have to say, if Toei Animation needs to do filler in the future, and they might need to because they don't want the anime catching up completely to the manga, then I feel like this sort of thing is what they should go for. Show us things that we assumed happened, but we didn't necessarily see drawn out explicitly in the manga chapters that these episodes are based on. So for those of you guys who are anime-only watchers, you might not know this, and actually for some of you guys who are manga readers as well, who might not completely remember the Sabo's Adventure chapter that this episode was based on, half of this episode, was in canon filler. A lot of this stuff was not shown explicitly in the manga, especially like the stuff with him invading the fortress and then like breaking the floor, and a lot of the stuff with Koala and some of the training with Hack. Like a lot of that stuff was not actually shown in the manga chapter that this was based on. We could have assumed that it happened, but we didn't know for sure. The only scenes in this episode that were 100% canon were the scenes with Sabo being saved by Dragon, of course. And actually, I'm going to talk about that scene a little bit in detail just because I don't really think I like the way the anime did that scene when compared to the manga. But regardless, that scene is canon. The scene with Sabo waking up and not wanting to go back to Great Terminal, that is canon. And then the stuff as well with Sabo reading the newspaper and remembering Ace but not remembering why he remembers Ace. That stuff is canon. But most of the other stuff in this episode, of course excluding the recap stuff and the stuff near the beginning in Kuros' house, most of the rest of this was indeed filler. And while we're talking about the stuff near the beginning and the stuff in Kuros' house, I've always thought it was interesting that Bellamy is with that group. We have the samurai and we have Law, but Bellamy is with the Straw Hats in Kuros' house. And you'd think, since Bellamy was technically a member of the Doflamingo family, he would be taken off by the Marines. But it sounds like Zoro actually ended up saving him because he knows he was a friend of Luffy's. Or Law ended up saving him. I don't exactly remember which, but some character ended up saving Bellamy knowing that he was a friend of Luffy's. So I thought that was really, really interesting that they showed that. And I think that might be explained a little bit more in detail in future episodes, but I won't get into that because it's obviously spoilers. But regardless, I do think it's interesting, and I did forget that he was actually in the house with Kuros and the rest of them recovering near the beginning of this episode. But excluding that little bit near the beginning, I have to say I actually really did enjoy this episode. I thought it was a really fun episode because we're seeing stuff that, again, we assumed happened, but we didn't know for sure. And I have to say, when I saw that fight with Kuma and the fight with Hack, and that scene where Hack is basically training all the kids of the Revolutionary Army, and then you see Sabo like, no, that's going to make me weak-muscled, and Hack's like, no, you got to get over there, and he's about to like slap him, and then Sabo just goes around, dodges it, and like punches him. It was like, whoa, man. Like Sabo, at the age that Luffy was at, like at 12 or whatever, was actually able to avoid Hack's punches. I was like really impressed by that. And I really like the way that they sort of built up Sabo's natural ability to fight, because obviously he trained with Luffy and he trained with Ace when they were kids. He was like a little brat. So it was really cool to sort of see him put that to good use. And then even when he was like 17 years old, he was using Haki. Like when they go to invade that nameless fortress near the ending in the flashback, and you see Sabo walking in towards the fortress, and Koala's like, don't go in there, and Hack is kind of scared for him too. Sabo is avoiding all the gunfire. They're asking him like, whoa, how are you dodging these bullets? He uses Haki on his hand, breaks through the door, and then when he's surrounded by soldiers, he breaks the floor like he does in Dressrosa. It's like, dude, Sabo was a monster, even at the age of like 17 or 19 or however old he was in that flashback. I thought that was crazy. Seeing teenage Sabo just go in like that. I know a lot of that wasn't actually canon to the manga chapter, but still in all, like, that is pretty cool. And they would not have included that if Oda, didn't approve of it or whatever. I know a lot of this stuff has to go through Oda, and he has to say, oh, yeah, that's fine, or I'm not going to write that in, so you could show that in the anime. So, yeah, this is the kind of filler that I like, because it's in canon filler. It's stuff that we could just presume is canon. It's probably never going to be told to us that it's not. And I don't know. I enjoy this because you don't really know what's going to happen with that kind of stuff. It's in canon, but again, it could go a whole bunch of different places because it's filler ultimately. But yeah, that fight with Hack, the bit with Kuma as well, like right after he dodges Hack and he's fighting Hack and he pulls off his pants, and then Kuma goes in and just slaps Sabo and he goes flying, and then Sabo comes back like a little bit later with the pipe and attacks Kuma and then attacks Dragon. It's like, bro, you're 12 years old. You can't be attacking the head of the Revolutionary Army and a future Shichibukai when you're 12 years old with a rusty pipe. That's crazy. And it was just enjoyable to me. I loved the music, by the way, too, in Sabo's like training montage where he's going through like schooling in the Revolutionary Army, and we see Inazuma like teaching him really quickly, and then you see like some of the training with Hack. I loved that like Rocky-esque music, but it was also like kind of inspirational. It obviously wasn't Rocky music, but it was like, I don't know, it was inspirational and it was cool and I enjoyed it. And I don't know if that was a new music track or not. I have to go back and re-listen, but it sounded new to me. So new music track and more cool revolutionary stuff, I'm all for it. But I do think it's really interesting, kind of jumping around, but I do think it's really interesting that in that scene where Sabo was knocked out and he was, completely forgot everything that happened in the Great Terminal, he was talking to Ivankov, I do think it's really interesting that even though he has amnesia, he still remembered that he didn't want to be in Grey Terminal, and he remembered that the people of Grey Terminal were bad, not the Grey Terminal, but of Goa Kingdom, were bad because of what they were going to do to the people of Grey Terminal. They were just going to kill them. And by the way, in case you guys didn't remember that storyline, I actually think this was a really good recap episode. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of when they add in things directly from the episodes they were based on, and by the way, those scenes in this episode, like, Saint, whatever his name is, like when he shoots Sabo's boat, and then the stuff with Luffy and Ace, like thinking about Sabo when he was dead, and then like all the stuff of Sabo trying to put out the fire, that's all pulled directly from the anime episode that originally came from. That was not reanimated content. That was completely pulled from that episode, and I know that because I used a lot of that footage for my Icy Fire music video a while ago. And so I know that episode back to front. I recognized a lot of the scenes, like when St. Charles or whatever his name is, he looks up and he screams at Sabo, like, and he uses that weird special effect with like the lines or whatever. I know that was originally from the same episode. So it's weird to see that they completely reused the animation, but again, I don't really mind because I feel like it's been long enough since the events of the post-war arc that it was kind of like justified that they added the stuff back in, because not everybody is like us, right? Not everybody watches One Piece every single week and follows all these characters and remembers exactly what happens. I'm sure a lot of people, when Sabo first showed up again in Dressrosa, didn't even remember who Sabo was. They were probably like, who is this character? People who obviously, again, didn't read everything and maybe skip some of the stuff, maybe skip some of the post-war stuff, because ultimately if you skipped post-war, you wouldn't have known who Sabo was, and that's like a kind of minor arc really in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, I do think it was important that they added the recap stuff and sort of showed where Sabo came from again, but I can't help but feel bad for Sabo because he doesn't remember anything, but he remembers that the people of the kingdom that he comes from are just horrible people. And this isn't a spoiler, so don't worry, anime-only watchers, but I will say that stuff does come back as recent as the last chapter of the manga. Characters from the stuff in post-war and the Goa Kingdom do come back in the manga. And I'm not going to say who, obviously that's not a big spoiler. That would be a big spoiler, I mean, if I spoiled who. But characters from that arc do come back. So again, if you haven't completely watched the post-war arc, I would recommend doing that before they catch up to the ending events of the next arc of the manga, which I think is going to be like 40 or 50 episodes from now. But regardless, that stuff I thought was great. Seeing all that stuff again. And then again, seeing the training montage with Sabo, hearing the music with Sabo, seeing more of Koala as a kid, seeing Sabo and Koala grow up and their antics, like where Sabo's peeling the potatoes and Koala's playing with his face. I loved it. I thought it was great. And then again, of course, that sequence where they invade the fortress and Sabo goes in with Haki and he's like 19 years old. That was incredible too. And, there were some little bits that, again, maybe didn't need to be dragged out as long as they were. Like, some of the Luffy recap stuff is like, bro, Luffy's sleeping. We don't need to see him and Ace thinking that Sabo's dead again. And they showed that quite a bit. And there weren't really any, like, still shots in this episode, but the few still shots that I noticed were really well detailed, I thought. And a lot of those still shots were mostly in the montage sequence, but regardless, some of that looked really good. I thought the art quality was just top-notch. The colors were really pretty. And there was one scene in particular where I sort of, like, stepped back and was like, whoa, am I watching One Piece? Is this a Toei animated, like, episode? Because, the scene where Sabo is talking to Ivankov and Inazuma and Dragon about not wanting to go back to Grey Terminal, his face and Dragon's face in that scene, and I'm probably going to use their faces for the thumbnail of this video, their faces were supremely detailed. They had these good, like, big, thick lines around their head, but then, like, they had all these little intricate things on their faces. Like, you could see parts of Sabo's scar, and then you could see, like, just lines on their face and dirt. It looked really, really good, and it stood out to me, like, I don't know if a lot of budget went to those cells or what was happening there, or maybe, and I also don't remember too, this is another thing, I don't remember if they were cutting corners on this or whatever, but the scene where Sabo is sitting inside of his house and he's thinking about what's going to go down in Grey Terminal, and his entire house is just gray except for him and the birds. I don't know if that was like an animation budget cut technique, like they didn't want to actually go in and like paint that part, or if that was actually from the original episode. I have to go back and watch. But regardless, I did actually enjoy this despite a lot of this being filler, and I'm actually looking forward to next week's episode as well, because if we find out more about what happened while Sabo was in the Revolutionary Army, I think I'm going to get a kick out of it. So ultimately, it was still a filler episode for most of it, and there was a lot of recap, but I am going to give this one a 3.5 out of 5. I think it was enjoyable. I would actually recommend that you watch this episode, even though a lot of it is recap. I know sometimes, this is like a little bit of inside baseball, I'm debating getting rid of my numbered review scores, not just for my anime episode reviews, but also for my manga chapter reviews and everything, because it seems like sometimes my scores are arbitrary. Like, I'm thinking of going in a direction where I say, this episode is worth watching or it's not worth watching at the end, and there's no review score. You can let me know in the comments below if you're okay with that, or you want me to keep doing the review scores, and then I'll just like sort of base my decision off what you guys say in the comments. But I am thinking about abolishing that, because I don't know. I just feel like I see a lot of people go, you're giving a lot of episodes 4.5s or 3.5s. And I'm like, well, what else would you give those episodes? Like, if I thought they were good but not amazing, then I'd give them a 3.5 because they weren't great, they weren't 4. And if I thought they were amazing but not quite perfect, then I'm going to give them a 4.5. So like, I don't know. I'm thinking, like I said, of abolishing the number system. Let me know down in the comments below. Give me your thoughts on this episode in the comments below as well. Were you okay with all the filler stuff? Like this. Let everybody know that the episode is now live on Crunchyroll. And please be sure to subscribe, because I do reviews of One Piece and now Boku no Hero Academia and Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress and a bunch of other shows. And all these big NX rumors are dropping right now too. So if you like Nintendo news, be sure to subscribe as well. And until next time, I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.